Hey guys, how's it going? Comparing here. So I know a lot of you out there are a lot of warrior players. Every game you guys play the warrior class, the hero class, the Conan the barbarian class. You guys know what I'm talking about. I know you're out there. I used to be like you a couple of years ago. I haven't really strayed too far away from the warrior class, but typically I like to go with a little bit of magic. Maybe around like an archer class is usually what I like. I like maybe a little bit of physical range. I like the physical builds, not so much the full spellcaster, but in some cases I give it a try. But in any case, I know a lot of you guys are out there and you're thinking of playing Path of Exile and haven't heard many good things about the melee scene. Now, I think, at least in my opinion, I feel that if some very few ranged abilities were tuned down, melee would be brought into the picture a little bit more than they are now. But the problem still exists that melee in this game requires a lot more to be a concrete class. If you're ranged, you don't really need that much survivability. You can just kind of you know, get by surviving burst and throwing your wand or shooting some arrows or casting some spells, casting some totems, having some zombies, just sitting in the back, not taking too many hits. But if you do have to take the hits, if you do have to be like a warrior class, you got to have a lot of survivability to do that. And I'm going to show you guys today just a small example of what kind of things you're going to need to do to make this work very late game. So here, this is the warrior princess right here. This is the female version of Conan the Barbarian. Got my two-handed sword. Typically, using a two-hander is not a great idea if you're going out in melee, but it's okay. It can work. You do more damage with a two-hander than you do with a one-hander, evidently, at least in most cases. But the main thing with a two-hander is if you end up doing more damage, you can get more leech, and if you get more leech, you can kind of survive a little bit better. The problem is that lifesteal in this game is applied as a hot, so a heal over time. It's not going to heal you instantaneously. So if you're taking insane damage, even though you're dealing insane damage and using lifesteal, in many cases you're not going to survive. I've talked about it in my Templar spec with this skill called Volpact, which lifesteal applies instantly. With this is the only way my Templar can survive against reflect mobs with the melee build. But the other thing is, the downsides are severe for most people who play melee characters. Life recovery from class and regeneration is no effect. So you can't get your life up except with, lifesteal. That's crazy. This is like a suicide talent. You don't want to use that. But I can show you guys my spec here. So I'm using the evasion with iron reflexes. Iron reflexes is really strong because items just themselves, the evasion based items, have more evasion than armor based armor have armor. So like the best armor based armor in the game has less armor than the best evasion based armor in the game. And as such, considering the fact that Iron Reflexes works with evasion rating and armor rating, if you so choose to get it, it allows you to get a lot of armor. But armor in this game doesn't work so well sometimes. Basically, the harder you are hit, the less percentage is taken away from that damage based on your armor. Like if you take a lot of damage, you remove a small percent, and if you take a small hit, it's going to absorb like all of it. So I mentioned this in a few videos, but it's very important. And it's very important for some players who use Endurance Cry and Endurance charges. So I don't have any Endurance charges on this character, but there's nodes on the passive tree, +1 to maximum Endurance charge. So how does that work? A lot of players use Endurance charges who play melee, and they use them because they're very effective. What Endurance charge does is it adds 5% absorption and 5% all resists. The absorption is on top of your armor. So if a boss hits you, and that boss would only cause you to mitigate like 50% of the damage, as opposed to all the shitty bombs around him, which you absorb 90%. If you have, let's say, 5 endurance charges, so 5 times 25 would give you 25% added melee absorption. So your absorption would become 75. Now the thing is, with the way percentages work, in this case, if you have more base armor, the more effective the endurance charges are. So armor, while it's really a crap stat for most casters and most ranged. It's a very good stat for players who plan on taking melee hits. So you always got to keep that in mind. If you do take some of the dex nodes and you do the Iron Reflexes stuff, you want to use stuff like Grace to boost your evasion, and you can use certain other ores like Determination to multiply it. So there's a few things that you can do in terms of getting your armor up. But on top of having really high armor, you need to have really high hit points. So I have quite a few of the hit point nodes here. I have a lot of the 8%. These aren't particularly good. I have a few more here. But also I have the life regeneration. What a lot of people do to survive in melee is you get an insane amount of life and an insane amount of life regeneration per second. You can get almost 8% life regeneration from the tree. There's the Golem Blood Talents, there's the Duelist 1%, there's a little bit over 1% in the center, there's the Marauder Troll Blood as well as the 0.4%, and there is the Templar 1%. So if you get all of those, and you can get some from gear in certain more creative ways, and you can use the Vitality Aura, you can hit a crazy amount of life regen. And life regen is really good because it doesn't interact with potions. Potions are going to heal you over time, and you're really not going to be able to get that much out of them if you have a large health pool, which you will as the warrior class in this game. So you want to have some life regeneration. In some cases, you may want to try to go a little bit overboard. You want to try to get some armor. You want to try to get some of those endurance charges when you need them. But in the end, there are going to be cases, at least in maps, where you're still going to take tremendous amount of damage. And certain things that come to mind are, in some cases, you get a map mod that the mobs do additional damage as, let's just say, lightning. So it'd say like 100% added damage as lightning for mobs. And this is bad enough because if you're surrounded and you get shock stacked, you're pretty screwed. So for that I like to use the leather cap, but it's still not enough in some cases. If you cannot be shocked, that's amazing in melee. But in some of these maps that they do extra elemental damage, they also have minus player resistances, and that works as a penetration effect. So if you have like 75 resists and you have like minus 20 to player resistances, your maximum resist then becomes 55. Well, you can mitigate that a little bit by using over resist passive talents like that. You can't really mitigate it fully. And the problem becomes that although you're taking a very small portion of the melee damage that they're doing, the elemental damage you can't scale back sometimes, and you can get absolutely destroyed. With some of those map mods, the mobs are literally untankable. And the problem becomes as follows. If you're playing with a group, which you will probably be doing if you plan on leveling to a high level in this game, because there are significant group incentives in this game, most players who play range classes are okay with those affixes, and as a melee you will not be. So my last tip that I can give you guys is choosing an appropriate attack. There are a lot of melee attacks in this game. I can't say that most of them are garbage, but most of them in endgame lack versatility. So when you have an attack, let's say, I don't think I have any on this character, but a lot of attacks mimic the auto attack. So you have to get in melee and you auto attack, and if this rock was a mob, you could hit the rock, and then if you were over here because you didn't want to get close to the mob because the mob would totally destroy your character, you're useless. Okay, so you don't want an attack like that. There's a few attacks that come to mind, but with recent additions with skills and passives and maybe some creative shit that I haven't thought about, I'm sure there's a few more out there that you guys can work with. So what I like to use is, on this character for instance, I use Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike does a bolt of lightning, and the lightning projectile also has a physical component, so you can get some lifesteal. And right now, this character uses 2 lightning strikes. I use 1 lightning strike that's tailored for single target, and 1 that's tailored for AoE using chain. So I have some AoE. If I group up a bunch of mobs, I actually cleared quite a few in this area, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that too quickly. But basically, if I round up a bunch of mobs, I can kill them with chain, and if I only have 1 mob, I can kill them with my single target ability, the single target version of the ability. And the reason this is good is both the abilities are lightning strike, so I can scale that through my passive tree. I can get passive keynotes that deliberately scale this one ability as opposed to any other. Now the issue is that there aren't that many abilities like these. There are abilities that kind of have some range component, but the problem is that there are not many, and they're usually very restrictive. While Lightning Strike allows you to use Lightning Strike with pretty much any weapon, you know, there's really no weapon requirement. You don't have to use a one-hander, you don't have to use a two-hander. There are other abilities like Ground Slam, which I'm sure you've seen me use in the Cinema where you just slam the ground and shoots out some shit from the bottom and hits the mobs, goes under Frostball. It's a pretty cool ability. It doesn't do as much damage as Lightning Strike when there's fewer targets, but when there's a lot, overall it can do a little bit more. Now the main problem with that is Ground Slam requires you to use a staff or a hammer. Staffs are kind of bad because the minimum damage is very low, so you may not be able to get a stun effect, and the consistency on damage is not so good. Hammer is good, but you know, if you're restricted to one weapon class in terms of being effective with your character, you may have a rough time finding gear. There's also AoE abilities like Sweep, like Cleave, which are originally really shitty because they have a very small range, but they are an AoE based ability, and you can increase it with AoE nodes. Let me just get out of here before these mobs seek me out and kill me. And you can increase that. For instance, when you saw the Sweep Templar, I was using spells like Amplify, increased radius of area skills. So you can get those, you can get more radius, you can get more radius there. And you can essentially have a sweep or some kind of ability that's melee, like Cleave, that you can hit a wide area of the screen and not actually have to be in melee of the mob while you are in melee of them. So you can kind of avoid getting hit by the mob while hitting them back. So a little bit of a ranged proportion, a little bit of a ranged property to your melee character is really what you need in the late game. That's really about it. If you stack the survivability, if you stack the life, you know, if you really want to do the Resolute Technique Blood Magic build, it's going to be effective until the later levels at least. You're going to learn a lot. The build doesn't really matter as long as you have the hit points, as long as you have a decent amount of armor. You get that life regen, and when you're grouping and when you're doing content that you're not so sure of, have some kind of ranged component in your melee attack, and you should be fine. While maybe not quite as effective as a lot of bow builds and spell builds out there, you should enjoy your Warrior Conan the Barbarian experience playing this game, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.